r/NoSleep. The Lighthouse Keeper's Rules. When I first applied for the lighthouse keeper position, I thought I was escaping the world. Solitude, the sea, and a paycheck that exceeded my expectations for simply keeping the light on. What could be better? As a marine biology graduate, I had spent years studying the ocean but found few career prospects. This job seemed like the perfect retreat, time alone, a break from societal expectations, and the promise of a fresh start. The lighthouse, perched on a remote island, offered me all of that and more. Or so I thought. Before I could even step foot on the island, they made me attend a week-long orientation back on the mainland. It was a monotonous series of lectures on safety protocols, weather tracking, and emergency procedures. They walked me through how to operate the lighthouse machinery. Though automated, it still needed monitoring. The practical parts seemed straightforward enough. What struck me as odd was the insistence on the human element. The instructors repeated over and over that it was crucial someone always remained on the island. The reason? Unforeseen circumstances, they called it. I brushed it off as typical bureaucratic language. After all, the sea is unpredictable, and the lighthouse's primary job was to keep ships from wrecking along the rocky shore. I took their warning seriously enough but couldn't help feeling that they were overblowing the whole thing. On the day I was ferried to the island, the wind carried a bitter chill despite the season. The ferry captain, a grizzled man who spoke very little, seemed eager to leave once he'd dropped me off. He handed me my supply boxes, food, basic tools, and personal items I had packed, and gave me a tight-lipped nod. I watched as the ferry shrank into the horizon, leaving me alone on that bleak rock. The island wasn't large, just a few acres of jagged cliffs and hardy vegetation. The lighthouse itself loomed overhead, its white paint weathered by decades of exposure to the salty air. A dilapidated outbuilding sat to the side, likely used for storage once upon a time. Now it was just me, the birds, and the endless waves crashing against the rocks below. I found the living quarters inside the lighthouse simple but serviceable. A small kitchen, a bedroom, and a narrow spiral staircase leading up to the beacon at the top. It had a certain charm in its isolation. There was a shortwave radio for emergencies, though the man at the orientation assured me it was rarely needed. On the small table beside the bed, I found a notebook. Its cover was damp, the pages curled with age. At first, I thought it was a logbook, maybe notes left by the previous keeper. But when I opened it, what I found inside gave me pause. The first page read, "The real rules. 1. Never leave the island for any reason once night falls. You must wait until dawn. 2. The foghorn must always be sounded exactly at midnight, regardless of weather conditions. 3. If you see lights other than the beacon in the water, do not investigate. 4. If the lighthouse beacon flickers, immediately relight it by hand, but do not look directly at the bulb. 5. Never answer the door after dark, no matter who or what is knocking. 6. If a shipwreck appears on the horizon and no radio contact is received, do not assist. They are not seeking help. 7. Should you hear a voice calling from the rocks beneath the lighthouse, ignore it. Under no circumstances should you respond. 8. Always sleep with the windows closed. You may hear tapping, ignore it. 9. Should you hear footsteps ascending the lighthouse stairs at night, do not open the door. Stay inside until dawn. The handwriting was neat but spidery, as though it had been written in haste. I stared at the page for a long time, my initial amusement fading into a cold knot in my stomach. This had to be some kind of prank. Maybe the last keeper had a twisted sense of humor and decided to mess with me. I tossed the notebook aside, already planning to ignore its absurd instructions. But even as I brushed it off, the isolation began to creep into my bones. As days passed, I found myself growing more attuned to the sounds of the island. The wind howling through the cracks in the stone, the distant crash of waves, the cawing of gulls, it was a symphony of nature that became my only companion. The first night. On the fourth night, everything changed. I had just finished eating dinner when I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Remembering the second rule in the notebook, sound the foghorn at midnight, I chuckled to myself. Despite the clear sky and calm seas, I figured it wouldn't hurt to humor the previous keeper's joke. I flipped the switch, and the deep, mournful sound of the foghorn echoed across the empty waters. Then, silence. I glanced toward the beacon controls, and a wave of unease rolled through me. The light, always steady and bright, flickered. The machinery hum, which I had grown used to, had stopped. My stomach tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried up the spiral staircase, my footfalls echoing through the stone walls. When I reached the lantern room, I found the beacon struggling, dimming in and out. Without thinking, I followed the notebook's instructions. I killed the power and manually relit the beacon. As the light flared to life, something caught my eye. A shadow, slithering just beyond the bulb's glow. For a split second, it seemed to stretch and writhe within the glass, but when I blinked, it was gone. My heart raced. Maybe it was just my imagination. I descended back to my quarters, but sleep wouldn't come. The strange occurrences weighed on me, pressing down like the dark, suffocating fog that had started to roll in from the sea. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, the unmistakable sound of tapping on the window. Soft at first, like the wind pushing pebbles against the glass. Tap. 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 I froze, every hair on my neck standing on end. I remembered the 8th rule, always sleep with the windows closed. You may hear tapping, ignore it. But the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Tap. 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 With trembling hands, I reached for the lantern beside my bed and switched it on. The tapping stopped instantly, the room sinking into an oppressive silence. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, my mind replaying the sound over and over. The following day was unsettlingly still. The sea, usually alive with crashing waves, seemed to hold its breath, and the sky had turned a sickly shade of gray. As dusk approached, I caught sight of something on the horizon, a shipwreck. The shipwreck. My heart sank as I remembered Rule 6, if a shipwreck appears on the horizon and no radio contact is received, do not assist. They are not seeking help. Through the binoculars, I saw that the ship wasn't drifting aimlessly, it was tethered, anchored to something deep below. As I focused on the wreck, my breath caught in my throat. The masts were splintered, the hull decaying, but worse than that. It wasn't an ordinary wreck. Dark shapes moved beneath the water, circling the wreckage like predators. They were too far to make out clearly, but their shapes were wrong. Twisted. Suddenly, a voice called my name from below the lighthouse. A melodic, almost hypnotic sound, whispering just on the edge of hearing. I stiffened, my mind racing. Rule 7, should you hear a voice calling from the rocks beneath the lighthouse, ignore it. I slammed the window shut and retreated from the room. But as night fell, the voice returned, this time louder, more urgent. It was no longer a faint whisper, it was calling to me, beckoning me outside. I stuffed my ears with my hands and tried to block it out, but the voice seeped into my mind, burrowing deeper. Then came the footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Ascending one step at a time, as if whatever was outside wanted me to hear it approach. My heart pounded in my chest, and I remembered the final rule, should you hear footsteps ascending the lighthouse stairs at night, do not open the door. The knocking followed soon after. At first, it was gentle, almost polite. Then it grew louder, more insistent. Whatever stood outside wanted in. I crouched in the corner of my room, the lantern flickering beside me. The knocking became a pounding, shaking the walls of the lighthouse. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited. Just before dawn, the knocking stopped. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, I cautiously opened the door. The lighthouse was empty, but in the entryway, I found a single wet footprint, leading up the stairs. The final day. Despite everything, I stayed one more night. I thought maybe it was just isolation getting to me. I rationalized it away, maybe the tapping was just the wind, maybe the shipwreck was some bizarre oceanic phenomenon. But that final night, I realized how wrong I had been. At exactly midnight, I sounded the foghorn, as I had each night before. But this time, the fog rolled in thick and fast, swallowing the island whole. I could barely see the sea just beyond the cliff, but I knew something was out there. I felt it, a presence, watching me, waiting. I hurried to relight the beacon, but no matter how hard I tried, the light refused to stay on. It flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The fog closed in around the lighthouse, and from the depths of that suffocating mist, I saw lights in the water, strange, shifting orbs that bobbed on the surface like distant lanterns. I remembered Rule 3, if you see lights other than the beacon in the water, do not investigate. The lights grew brighter, closer. I backed away from the window, trying to ignore them, but it was impossible. The tapping started again, this time from every window, every door. Then the knocking returned, louder and more insistent than ever. I barricaded myself in my quarters, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice from the rocks began to rise, calling my name over and over again. And then the footsteps. This time, they didn't stop at the door. They kept coming, closer and closer. The lantern flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness. I don't remember how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. But when dawn finally broke, the fog lifted, and the knocking stopped. The shipwreck was gone. The lights in the water were nowhere to be seen. I didn't pack. I didn't even lock the lighthouse. I simply ran. As I boarded the ferry that afternoon, the captain gave me a knowing look. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't need to. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the lighthouse one last time. At the top, in the lantern room, stood a figure. It was barely visible in the sunlight, but it was there, watching. As we rounded the corner of the island, the figure lifted a hand, and then, just like that, it was gone. And in its place, the lighthouse beacon flickered back to life. A month after I left the lighthouse, I received an official letter from the Maritime Service. It was brief and cold, stating that my resignation had been accepted, and reminding me that my last paycheck was enclosed. At the bottom of the letter was a note, handwritten in spidery, neat handwriting that I immediately recognized. The light must always stay on. I never returned to the island, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through my windows and the ocean roars in the distance, I swear I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And then, a voice. My name, whispered on the wind.